Hello, dear listeners. Take a deep breath with me. Imagine the wild, unforgiving mountains where the wind whispers secrets through ancient pines and small towns cling to valleys like stubborn roots in rocky soil. A strong-willed woman runs her own business, healing others with herbs and knowledge passed down through generations. Life is hard, but she's carved out her place. Then, in one shattering moment, everything changes. A forced choice, a dangerous man, and a bargain that could destroy or transform. Are you ready to step into this world? Let's walk this path together, feeling every emotion, every tension, every unexpected turn. These stories remind us that love often arrives in the most unlikely disguises. Lillian Harper's ordinary morning shattered like fragile glass on that crisp autumn day in Willow Bend. The little bell above her Remedy boutique door jingled innocently at first, but then 5 rough men in heavy, worn wool coats burst in, their boots thudding heavily on the wooden floor. Jars of carefully labeled dried herbs, lavender for calm, chamomile for sleep, willow bark for pain, rattled dangerously on the shelves. Lillian had been hunched over her counter since dawn, her fingers ink-stained from balancing ledgers that refused to balance. The devastating truth had dawned with the sun. Her business partner, Victor, that charming but unreliable man she'd trusted for years, had fled into the high ridges, absconding with their entire shared savings and leaving her drowning in a $400 debt to creditors known for their brutal collection methods. "Miss Harper?" the tallest and broadest of the men said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder rolling through the canyons. His face was weathered, expressionless, eyes as hard as flint. "Mr. Blackwell requires your immediate presence." The name struck her like a cold wind off the peaks. Alexander Blackwell. Even in the remote settlements of these mountains, his reputation preceded him like a shadow at dusk. The trapper turned empire builder who claimed vast tracts of land, who outbid, outmaneuvered, and, when necessary, out-intimidated any rival. Ruthless in trade, dangerous when crossed, and arrogantly certain of his dominance over these wild lands. Lillian's hand instinctively dropped below the counter, fingers brushing the hilt of the small, sharp dagger she kept hidden there for protection. She straightened her posture, meeting the man's gaze with steady emerald eyes. "I'm quite busy preparing winter green bundles for the trading caravans. If Mr. Blackwell wishes to discuss remedies, he can wait his turn like any other customer." The man's expression didn't flicker, not even a hint of amusement or annoyance. "This is not a request, miss. It's an order." Can you picture her there, alone against these imposing figures, heart-pounding but refusing to show fear? That quiet strength, that fire burning inside, it's what makes her unforgettable. Hold that image, it's the heart of our tale. 15 tense minutes later, after a brisk horseback ride along narrow, winding trails, flanked by towering evergreens and sheer drop-offs, Lillian was ushered into an imposing timber lodge perched high above the vast Elk Canyon. The view from the wide windows was nothing short of breathtaking. Layers of blue ridges fading into the horizon, a river glinting like a silver ribbon far below, golden aspens trembling in the breeze. But Lillian had eyes only on the man standing at the room's center, his broad back to her, hands clasped behind him as he stared out at his domain like a lord surveying conquered lands. "Your former partner borrowed from me," Alexander Blackwell stated flatly, without turning around. $2,500, which he claimed was an investment in your quaint little Remedy boutique. "I was unaware of any such loan," Lillian responded firmly, refusing to let her voice waver. "Victor assured me the funds came from a legitimate merchant banker in Cheyenne. If he misrepresented that, the fault is his alone." At that, Alexander turned slowly, deliberately, and the full force of his presence hit her like a mountain gust off the peaks. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered and powerfully built from years in the wilds. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, slightly tousled, framing a face that could have been carved from granite, strong jaw, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of storm clouds gathering over the peaks, a piercing blue-gray eye that seemed to see straight through to one's soul. Handsome in a harsh, unforgiving way, but his expression held only amused disdain, as if the world and everyone in it existed merely for his judgment. "You have options, Miss Harper," he said smoothly, circling his heavy oak desk with the deliberate grace of a predator assessing its prey. He moved like a man utterly confident in his power, no wasted motion, no doubt. "Option 1 is I call in the debt immediately. Your boutique closes its doors permanently. Your credit evaporates. You become, shall we say, unhoused. Option 2 is considerably more interesting." He stopped, leaning back against the desk, arms crossed over his broad chest. "My grandmother is in failing health. Her dearest wish before she departs this world is to see me married, settled. She holds a 35% stake in Blackwell Fur Enterprises, the company I built into what it is today. If I remain unmarried by the end of winter, her share transfers to charitable causes upon her passing, causes that, frankly, will squander it." Lillian blinked, struggling to process. "And this concerns me exactly?" "I require a wife, on paper for 1 year only, a quiet annulment or separation afterward. In return, your debt is erased entirely, and I will provide you with sufficient funds, generous funds, to relocate and establish yourself anew, wherever you desire, free from past burdens." "You cannot be serious," Lillian whispered. Then louder, "You expect me to marry you? A complete stranger? A man with your reputation?" "A marriage of pure convenience," he corrected smoothly, as if discussing a routine trade deal. "No romantic illusions, no entanglements, no expectations beyond public appearances when required. A simple contract benefiting us both." "This is insanity. I cannot, will not upend my life for such a farce." His gaze sharpened, flicking briefly to a thick leather folder on the desk. "Cannot? Your brother's medical care in the eastern cities is exorbitantly expensive, is it not? Your mother's ranch survived last year's drought by the skin of its teeth. One more poor season and foreclosure looms. And now this debt hanging over you like a noose, owed directly to me." He let the words settle heavily in the air between them. "You are intelligent, Miss Harper, resourceful, but even the most resourceful find themselves cornered eventually." The room seemed to close in, the grand views outside mocking her trapped feeling. "Why choose me?" she asked at last, her voice quieter now. "You are unknown in my circles, no prior connections that could complicate matters. You are comely enough to make the match believable without raising suspicions of ulterior motives." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "And most importantly, you are sufficiently motivated to agree." The word desperate hung unspoken, but it stung just the same. Lillian drew herself up to her full height, green eyes flashing with defiance. "I am not motivated by desperation. I am driven by resilience, and if I were to entertain this ludicrous proposition, I would require more than mere debt forgiveness and relocation money." One dark eyebrow arched in genuine surprise, the first crack in his composed facade. "You wish to negotiate? From your position?" "If I am to sacrifice an entire year of my independence, you will fully fund and supply the construction of a proper healing clinic in Oak Hollow, the one your company's monopolistic practices have been stifling by withholding lumber and materials at fair prices. The community there deserves proper medical care, not just my traveling remedies." For a long moment silence reigned. Then, to her astonishment, a low rumbling laugh escaped him, not warm, but acknowledging. "You are either the bravest woman I've encountered in these mountains, or the most foolish. But very well, you have made this proposition far more entertaining than I anticipated." He extended his large, strong hand across the desk. Calluses spoke of a man who, despite his wealth, still knew hard labor. Do we have a deal, future Mrs. Blackwell? Lillian stared at that outstretched hand, her mind racing. 1 year bound to this arrogant, dangerous man, for her family's security, for the clinic that could help so many, for a chance to rebuild stronger. It felt like selling her soul, or perhaps seizing control in the only way left to her. She placed her hand in his. Deal, but do not expect me to simper and fawn like some obedient wife. His grip tightened, firm and unyielding. I expect you to play the role convincingly when required. You will find I can be quite persuasive in ensuring cooperation. But what neither of them noticed in that charged moment was the faint involuntary spark in Alexander's storm-blue eyes, a flicker of intrigue, of admiration for the woman who had dared bargain with him as an equal. And Lillian missed the way his gaze lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. Neither could have predicted that this cold, calculated arrangement would slowly, inevitably thaw into something profound, something that would change them both irrevocably. Oh, my friends, if this opening has already captured your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe now. Your support means these stories reach more people who need them. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Cozy bed on a rainy night? Commuting through the city? What's your first impression of Lillian and Alexander? I can't wait to read them. Let's dive deeper. You expect me to fabricate what story for my family? Lillian paced furiously across the lodge's richly appointed study, her skirts swishing with each sharp turn. She nearly overturned a finely carved wooden statue on a side table, a piece that likely cost more than her entire year's earnings from the boutique. That we are deeply, passionately in love, Alexander replied calmly behind his desk, not bothering to look up from the ledger where his quill moved in precise strokes. That we met 8 months ago at the annual Frontier Harvest Fair in Willow Bend, that we have been courting in secret ever since, stolen moments away from prying eyes, that he proposed 2 weeks ago during a private moonlit picnic beside Crystal Lake, down on one knee with vows of eternal devotion. Lillian stopped pacing to stare at him in disbelief, a short laugh escaping despite her frustration. No one who knows me even moderately well would believe for a second that I willingly spent an evening at Crystal Lake. The mosquitoes there are legendary. I'd rather face a grizzly. A faint twitch at the corner of his mouth, the closest thing to amusement she'd seen him yet. Conveniently, your remaining family is back in Kansas and has not seen you in person for nearly 3 years. Distance breeds believability. He finally glanced up, those piercing eyes locking onto hers with unsettling intensity. My associates have compiled a comprehensive backstory. Memorize every detail. He pushed a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished desk toward her. Lillian flipped it open cautiously. Inside were professionally commissioned charcoal sketches depicting the two of them in romantic poses, strolling hand in hand through autumn leaves, sharing a dance at the fair, him presenting her with wildflowers. There were pages of written narratives detailing supposed shared moments, a first meeting when she tended a minor injury he'd sustained, secret letters exchanged via trusted couriers, private walks where deep conversations supposedly blossomed into love, even samples of forged correspondence in handwriting that mimicked ours, carefully aged with tea stains for authenticity. "This is disturbingly elaborate," she said, closing the folder with a snap. "It feels like preparing for a deception on the scale of a territorial election fraud." "This is necessary," he corrected coolly. "My grandmother is no fool. She built much of the family enterprise with her own hands after my grandfather passed. She detects falsehoods the way a hound scents blood." 4 days had elapsed since their initial confrontation, and Lillian still awakened each morning in the guest room of his lodge, temporarily relocated for preparations, questioning her sanity. She'd signed more binding legal documents than when she'd first opened her boutique. Marriage contracts, non-disclosure agreements, financial settlements, all drafted with the precision of a lawyer accustomed to high-stakes territorial deals. "When exactly do I meet this formidable grandmother of yours?" she asked, attempting nonchalance. "Tomorrow evening, a formal family dinner at the main homestead. My Aunt Evelyn is arriving from Boise specifically for the occasion, and Uncle Harold will be there as well." "Fantastic," Lillian muttered sarcastically. An audience of discerning relatives right from the start. No opportunity to ease into the role.
Speaking of roles, Alexander rose from his chair, his height and presence suddenly filling the room as he circled the desk. From an inner pocket of his tailored vest, he produced a small velvet box. Opening it with a flick, he revealed a stunning platinum ring centered with a large, flawless emerald that seemed to capture and reflect every bit of light in the room, like a piece of the forest trapped in stone. "It's beautiful," Lillian admitted before she could stop herself, then added dryly, "and excessively ostentatious. Precisely what the territory would expect Alexander Blackwell to present to his bride," he replied matter-of-factly. "Grandmother has an eye for quality jewelry. Anything less would raise questions." He took her left hand in his palm warm, rough from years of handling reins and rifles, and slid the ring onto her finger with surprising gentleness. It settled perfectly, as if made for her alone. The weight felt both anchoring and ominous, like wearing a beautiful shackle. "Perfect fit," he murmured, his voice lower than before, his thumb lingering to trace lightly over her knuckle. In that moment, Lillian became hyper-aware of how close they stood. The subtle scent of pine soap and leather that clung to him, the warmth radiating from his body, the faint white scar tracing above his right eyebrow that she'd somehow missed before. Her pulse quickened traitorously. She pulled her hand away more abruptly than intended. "There's one significant problem with your meticulously crafted plan," Lillian said, stepping back to regain composure. "I'm an abysmal actress. My one attempt at the church nativity play as a child, I was meant to be an angel announcing glad tidings. I tripped over my costume wings, knocked down the entire stable backdrop, and sent the baby Jesus doll flying into the front row. The congregation still brings it up at Christmas services." For the briefest instant, the corner of Alexander's mouth curved upward. Not quite a smile, but close enough to transform his stern features. "That is precisely why we practice." Before she could protest, he cupped her face gently between his large hands, his expression softening dramatically into something that looked remarkably like genuine adoration. "Lillian," he said, his voice shifting to a warm, intimate timbre that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "From the very first moment you stood your ground against me, I knew you were extraordinary. You challenge me in ways no one else dares. You make me strive to be the man worthy of someone as fierce and compassionate as you." Her breath caught. Even knowing it was rehearsal, his performance was flawless. The tenderness in his eyes, the sincerity in his tone. It felt dangerously convincing. "Your turn," he said softly, releasing her and stepping back, the cold mask sliding back into place as if a switch had been flipped. Lillian cleared her throat, cheeks warm. "Alexander, you are very rich and handsome and own a lot of land." He exhaled a long-suffering sigh. "We clearly have considerable work to do." "I'm serious," she pressed defensively. "I'm uncomfortable with this depth of deception. Why not simply tell your grandmother the truth, that this is a temporary arrangement of mutual benefit?" His response was immediate and sharp, all traces of warmth gone. "Out of question. It would break her heart. She raised me single-handedly after my father's death in an avalanche when I was 10. She sacrificed everything to keep the family enterprise afloat, and to ensure I wanted for nothing. She is the only person who has ever—" He stopped abruptly, jaw clenching as if he'd revealed more than intended. "The only person who has ever what?" Lillian asked quietly, sensing a rare glimpse beneath the armor. "Loved me without condition or expectation," he finished at last, his voice carefully controlled once more. "This marriage, seeing me settled, is her dying wish. I will not deny her that peace." Before Lillian could respond or process the vulnerability he had briefly exposed, a firm knock sounded at the study's door. Alexander's assistant entered with a stack of correspondence. "Sir, the Randall brothers have arrived for their scheduled meeting regarding the northern trapping routes. And another message from the circuit preacher. He requires confirmation on ceremony details by the end of the week." "Circuit preacher?" Lillian repeated once the assistant departed. "The wedding must occur within 4 weeks," Alexander explained, shifting seamlessly back to business. "It needs to be grand enough to satisfy societal expectations and quiet grandmother's concerns, but not so public as to attract unnecessary gossip or speculation.
4 weeks? Lillian echoed in disbelief. That's utterly impossible to arrange properly. Not when one has infinite resources at his disposal and the finest seamstress in the territory on retainer. Beatrice Lang is expecting us at Dawson's trading outpost within the hour to begin measurements, fabric selections, and overall planning. He continued without pause. Your boutique has been temporarily closed for essential repairs, all costs covered by me, work supervised by my most trusted men. Your assistant has been given a generous bonus and paid leave to ensure her discretion and comfort. Lillian stared at him, anger rising. You cannot simply take complete control of my life this way. Closing my shop, paying my employee, dictating my schedule? For the duration of our agreement, 1 year, our lives are legally and practically bound together. He moved to the door and held it open for her, his tone final. And at this moment, we have a wedding to plan, darling. The endearment was laced with sarcasm, but as Lillian passed close by him in the doorway, their eyes met and held for a charged heartbeat. Something electric passed between them. Awareness, challenge, perhaps the first hint of genuine curiosity. Neither acknowledged it, but neither could deny it either.
That tension, that unspoken pull, can you feel it growing already? These two are like dry tinder waiting for a spark. If this story is drawing you in deeper, please like and subscribe right now, your second reminder, because every bit of support helps bring more tales like this to life. And comment below, where are you tuning in from today? What's your guess for how the family dinner will go? The following day brought the trial neither had fully prepared for, facing the matriarch of the Blackwell family, a woman who had built an empire from nothing and could spot a lie from across a crowded room. The Blackwell homestead was a sight to behold, sprawling across hundreds of prime acres in the sheltered Hawk Summit Valley. The main house was a grand 3-story log mansion, its timbers hewn from ancient pines, with wide verandas wrapped around every level and intricate carvings adorning the railings and eaves. Bears, eagles, mountain scenes that spoke of generations of wealth and pride. Despite her churning nerves, Lillian had an immediate longing to explore the extensive gardens she glimpsed below, particularly the sections devoted to medicinal herbs and healing plants. Alexander escorted her up the wide stone steps to the entrance, his hand resting lightly but possessively at the small of her back, a gesture that felt both protective and proprietary. Remember every detail we've rehearsed, he murmured close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin. How reassuring, Lillian whispered back sarcastically, though her stomach twisted with anxiety as she smoothed invisible wrinkles from her new forest green wool dress, masterfully tailored by Beatrice to accentuate her figure while maintaining modest frontier elegance. The massive double doors swung open before they could knock, revealing a stern-faced but efficient housekeeper who had clearly been watching for their arrival. Mr. Alexander, Miss Harper, the family is assembled in the main parlor. This way, please. Lillian's hand tightened involuntarily on Alexander's arm as they crossed the expansive entry hall. Sunlight streamed through tall windows onto polished wood floors covered with hand-woven rugs and walls adorned with family portraits, stern ancestors in formal poses, and beautiful tapestries depicting mountain hunts and trading expeditions. I feel as though I'm being led to judgment, Lillian whispered nervously. Family gatherings often feel that way, he replied dryly. But remember, wolves may circle, but they rarely attack their own. The main parlor was a warm, inviting space despite its grandeur, a massive river-stone fireplace with a cheerful fire crackling, comfortable leather seating arranged in conversational groups, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the gardens and distant peaks. As they entered, 3 figures rose to greet them, while one remained seated. A tall, elegantly dressed woman with the same striking blue-gray eyes as Alexander approached first, air kissing his cheeks with practiced affection. Alexander, my dear nephew, you've been keeping quite the secret. Her assessing gaze turned to Lillian, not hostile but certainly measuring every detail. Aunt Evelyn, Alexander said with smooth warmth that sounded almost genuine. May I present Miss Lillian Harper, my fiancée. Lillian, my Aunt Evelyn Blackwell. Evelyn took both Lillian's hands in her cool, manicured ones.
What a delightful surprise you are, my dear. We are all simply dying to know more about the woman who finally captured our elusive Alexander." "A joyous surprise indeed," boomed a cheerful voice as a portly gentleman with a salt and pepper beard and twinkling eyes stepped forward. "Uncle Harold at your service, Evelyn's long-suffering husband and Alexander's favorite uncle by default." "And I," announced the seated elderly woman with quiet authority that immediately commanded attention, extending one frail but steady hand adorned with multiple turquoise rings, "I am Eleanor Blackwell. Come here, child. Let me have a proper look at you. These old eyes aren't as sharp as they once were." Lillian approached respectfully, taking the offered hand with care. Despite her apparent fragility, Eleanor's grip was surprisingly firm, and her hazel eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed absolutely nothing as she studied Lillian's face. Evelyn gasped, softly, scandalized. Harold let out a low chuckle of delight. Alexander's jaw tightened, his eyes promising a serious conversation later. One day he arrived at my shop in person, furious that his carefully laid plans were being obstructed by a mere herbalist. We had quite the heated argument. I believe I referred to him as a heartless mountain tyrant who cared for nothing but profit. "And what," Eleanor asked, leaning forward with evident fascination, "my grandson do in response to such an insult?" I allowed myself a small smile. "He asked me to dinner." Harold burst into open laughter at that. Evelyn looked faintly horrified. Alexander, to Lillian's surprise, did not contradict her. "I declined," added Lillian, politely at first, then more firmly, 5 times in total. 5 times she turned me down," Alexander suddenly interjected, his voice softer than usual as he moved to sit on Lillian's other side. He took Lillian's hand in his, lacing their fingers together with casual intimacy that felt startlingly natural. His thumb began tracing slow, soothing circles on the back of her hand. Lillian turned to look at him, genuinely surprised by how seamlessly he had adapted to her improvised version and by the quiet sincerity in his tone.
"That was when I realized," Alexander continued, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch, "that she possessed a rare gift. She saw potential and beauty where others saw only weakness or worthlessness. She nurtured life that others would discard. And somehow, she saw the same in me, something worth saving, worth helping grow." The parlor fell completely silent. Even the crackling fire seemed hushed. Lillian's heart raced. Was this still part of the act? The way he looked at her, it felt achingly real. Eleanor was the first to break the quiet, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across her lined face. "Well now," she said softly, patting Lillian's knee, "that sounds remarkably like the truth. The kind of truth that builds something lasting." "Phew, that was a close call, wasn't it? But did you notice how Alexander jumped in to support her story? How he made it beautiful? The walls are starting to crack." Later, during a tour of the gardens before supper, Alexander pulled Lillian aside behind a tall screen of blooming wild rose hedges, their sweet scent heavy in the cooling air. "That was incredibly dangerous," he whispered fiercely, keeping his voice low. "Why risk going off script like that?" "Because your grandmother is far too perceptive to be fooled by our rehearsed fairy tale," Lillian replied calmly, meeting his intense gaze. "And because the most believable stories always contain substantial elements of truth. Calling you a heartless mountain tyrant lent it authenticity, didn't it?" He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Your recovery was impressive. The orchid detail added a nice touch." "Truth often makes the best foundation for any story," she said softly. Before he could respond or ask what she meant by that, Eleanor's voice carried from the veranda, calling them in for supper. But as they turned to go, Alexander caught her arm gently. "Lillian, there's something important you should know about grandmother. She has been diagnosed with advanced consumption. The physicians give her 8 months at best, perhaps less. This wedding, seeing me married, it truly is her final heartfelt wish." His voice held a raw note of grief he had never heard from him before, a vulnerability that humanized the arrogant man she'd first met.
For the first time, Lillian saw not the ruthless empire builder, but a grandson who deeply loved the woman who had raised him. "Then we will make it everything she hopes for," she said softly, covering his hand with hers. "We will make it count." From the veranda above, unseen by either of them, Eleanor watched the exchange with a small, knowing smile, noting the way they stood close, the gentle touch of hands, the way they seemed to lean towards each other instinctively, like flowers turning towards sunlight. And years later, as they walked hand in hand through the thriving gardens of the community center that bore her name, Lillian would often reflect on the extraordinary path that had led them here. She had been forced to marry the most arrogant and perilous ridge dweller in the entire territory, and it had turned out to be the greatest blessing of her life. Sometimes, the most magnificent gardens grow from the most unwilling seeds, planted in the rockiest soil. What an incredible journey of the heart. If this story moved you, touched you, made you believe in second chances and unexpected love, please comment love below. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. I've asked twice because your support truly makes these stories possible. Where are you listening from right now? What's your honest opinion on Lillian and Alexander's love story? Did the ending surprise you? A brand new tale is waiting. Click the one appearing on your screen now and let yourself fall into another world. Thank you for sharing this adventure with me. Until next time, keep believing in the power of unexpected love.